When a feared truth is revealed and nothing bad happens, it's tempting to assume that nothing meaningful has occurred. But today, we argue the opposite. The absence of consequence is not neutral. It teaches. What it teaches depends entirely on why the fear existed in the first place. Sometimes people fear consequences that were never warranted because of stigma, shame, or imagined rejection. When those fears are disproven by reality, silence can be healing. The person learns that the world is, in fact, safer than expected, that honesty does not threaten belonging, and that their internal model of danger was inaccurate. Other times, fear exists because real harm was done and consequences are deserved. When silence follows exposure in these cases, it does not heal, it distorts. The absence of response teaches that harm can be absorbed without repair, that accountability is optional, and that moral standards can be rewritten to match convenience. This framework examines that asymmetry through a sequence of 11 triads. Each triad describes a three-part relationship between self, truth, and social response, and shows how it stabilizes after a secret is exposed. In every case, the same outward outcome, that nothing happens, produces either integration or decay, depending on whether the original fear was mistaken or justified. The triads begin at the personal level, between two people, and gradually expand in scale. Early triads concern trust, learning, and conscience. Later triads address institutions, leadership, and collective identity. What begins as a private moral lesson becomes, by the end, a question of civilizational stability. Across the analysis, patterns repeat: silence, reinterpretation, stabilization. These repetitions are intentional. They show how small moral distortions, when left uncorrected, compound across time and scale. Silence either corrects fear or it teaches permission. The triads that follow are an attempt to make that difference precise. Coexistence versus equilibrium describes what kind of stability is produced when a feared secret is revealed. In the affirmed case, the elements in play are the person themselves, the people they fear judgment from, and the truth that was hidden. When the truth comes out and nothing bad happens, all three can exist together without strain. The person no longer fights themselves, others do not withdraw, and the truth no longer threatens the relationship. The stability that results is real and relieving. In the negated case, the elements are different. Harm has occurred, society is aware of it, and the self remains unchanged. When nothing happens after exposure, these elements also settle into a kind of stability, but it is a frozen one. Harm is not addressed, society avoids confrontation, and the self learns it can remain as it is. What looks like peace is actually a stalemate built on silence. The first triad establishes the agent's most basic epistemic conclusion, whether the world they inhabit is fundamentally safe to be honest with, or silently complicit in harm. In the affirmed case, fear arises from a mistaken belief about social rejection. When the person admits a stigmatized but non-harmful truth, such as struggling with depression, and the relationship remains intact, reality corrects the fear. The agent learns that their internal model of danger was inaccurate. The absence of negative consequence communicates that honesty does not threaten belonging. Reality and relationship coexist without fracture, and equilibrium is genuine. In the negated case, however, the same surface structure produces a radically different lesson. When a person admits to betraying a friend's trust and is met with silence rather than response, the system does not equilibrate. It freezes. The relationship continues, but only by suppressing moral recognition. The agent does not learn that reality is safe. They learn that reality tolerates unresolved harm. The lesson is not "I am accepted despite vulnerability," but acceptance does not depend on moral repair. What appears outwardly as stability is in fact complicity. This triad therefore distinguishes between a world that corrects false fear and a world that absorbs wrongdoing without response. Reinforcement versus feedback describes how repeated behavior is shaped by response over time. In the affirmed case, the sequence begins with disclosure, which is met with acceptance, leading to personal growth, which in turn makes further disclosure more likely. Each step strengthens the next, creating a loop where honesty becomes safer and more rewarding with repetition. The person learns that openness builds connection. In the negated case, the sequence reverses its moral direction. When wrongdoing or deception is met with no consequence, there is no interruption, no reckoning, and no reason to stop. The absence of response trains the person that restraint is unnecessary, and over time, transgression becomes easier and more frequent. The system still reinforces behavior, but it reinforces decay rather than growth. The second triad governs how repeated behavior is shaped over time. In the affirmed case, honest disclosure of insecurity is met consistently with reassurance and care. Each instance of truth-telling strengthens trust, which in turn lowers the cost of future honesty. The feedback loop reinforces restraint, openness, and relational responsibility. The agent learns that vulnerability is not merely survivable, but productive. Behavior trends toward alignment because the system rewards integrity. In the negated case, the same absence of consequence functions as a reinforcement loop in the opposite direction. When repeated lying is met with indifference or avoidance, the lack of confrontation becomes instructive. Each unchallenged transgression reduces the perceived cost of the next one. The system trains the agent that deception is efficient and safe. What looks like tolerance is in fact behavioral conditioning toward harm. This triad shows that silence is never neutral. It either strengthens restraint through responsive feedback or actively trains transgression through neglect. Causal versus reversion describes where moral explanation is placed when consequences fail to appear. In the affirmed case, a person fears exposure, risks it, and then experiences calm instead of punishment. The lack of harm following disclosure is correctly interpreted as evidence that the fear itself was mistaken. Cause and effect point outward. The world corrected the person's expectation, and their understanding updates accordingly. In the negated case, a serious wrong is exposed and nothing happens. Here, the absence of consequence does not feel like mercy. It becomes reinterpretation. Guilt fades not because repair occurred, but because nothing challenged it. The person concludes that if no response followed, the act must not have been wrong in the first place. Moral causality reverses direction, and responsibility is rewritten rather than resolved. The third triad determines where the agent locates moral causality. In the affirmed case, the agent fears external punishment for a harmless mistake. When they disclose the error and nothing bad happens, the causal arrow points outward. The world corrects the agent's false expectation. The lesson learned is epistemically healthy. Fear was exaggerated and reality proved more reasonable than anticipated. Moral standards remain intact, and the agent adjusts their risk assessment without altering their values. In the negated case, the absence of consequence produces a far more dangerous internal shift. When a serious ethical violation is exposed and the world fails to respond, the causal arrow reverses. Instead of concluding the system failed, the agent is tempted to conclude the act was not truly wrong. Moral meaning is rewritten internally to match external silence. This is not learning but moral reversion. Guilt is dissolved not through repair, but through reinterpretation. The triad thus marks the critical boundary between correction by reality and corruption of conscience. When causality collapses inward, wrongdoing is normalized at the level of belief. Nonlinearity versus retrospection describes how the meaning of events is shaped or misshaped by time. In the affirmed case, what was once withheld eventually becomes known, and though the disclosure is indirect or delayed, it prompts an unexpected reconciliation. The three key elements, truth, memory, and time, form a redemptive sequence. Truth re-enters the story, reshaping how the past is remembered, and time becomes a medium for healing rather than distortion. But in the negated case, these same elements interact differently. A harm occurs, no one responds, and as time passes, the absence of reaction alters memory. Truth is neither integrated nor corrected. It fades. What was once clearly wrong is retroactively softened, minimized, or reclassified as acceptable. The moral content of the past is overwritten, not repaired. This triad assesses how moral meaning behaves over time, whether it ripens into understanding or rots into justification. In the affirmed case, the delayed sharing of a difficult truth, like a family's past financial hardship, produces unexpected connection when finally spoken aloud. The event is not linear. It doesn't unfold with immediate cause and effect, but the long silence gives way to retrospective healing. Memory is not erased, it is reshaped in context, allowing the present to reinterpret the past with compassion. Truth, though deferred, still arrives with force and repairs what was fractured. In the negated case, however, a harmful act is ignored, and over time, the absence of consequence leads to revisionist forgetting. What was once perceived as harm is gradually reclassified. Not that serious, just a misunderstanding. The group begins to narrate its past around the silence, not the act. The individual learns that time and silence together can dilute moral clarity. Memory does not resolve toward justice. It erodes toward convenience. This triad shows that silence is not neutral in time. It either clears space for truth to unfold, or it repaves the past with denial. Inclusion versus exclusion reveals who is preserved or erased when silence protects the social order. In the affirmed case, truth is revealed. It leads to broader acceptance, and the person who spoke it is welcomed more fully into the group. Here, the relationship between truth, inclusion, and harm is restorative. Even difficult disclosures serve to expand the boundaries of belonging. The system signals that honesty does not isolate. It completes. In the negated case, however, a different dynamic unfolds. A harmed person speaks, but the group resists the implications. To maintain surface harmony, the truth is ignored. The victim is marginalized, and the perpetrator remains safely inside. The system demonstrates that it is willing to include those who do harm, but not those who name it. The cost of preservation is expulsion, not of the offender, but of the one who breaks the silence. Here we move from memory to belonging. This triad concerns who is welcomed into the moral circle after a secret is exposed. In the affirmed case, the disclosure of a stigmatized but non-harmful truth, such as an employee revealing a difficult background, results in active inclusion. The community adapts around the truth, not in spite of it. The agent learns that honesty deepens community, not threatens it. The response confirms. There is space for all of you here. Silence is not necessary to be accepted. Truth enhances participation. In the negated case, the revelation of harm, such as a victim speaking out, is met with silence or institutional defense of the perpetrator. The victim is functionally expelled, not overtly, but by the system's decision to preserve surface harmony over justice. Here, silence is not a sign of tolerance, but a tool of exclusion. The agent who caused harm remains within the circle. The one who revealed it is quietly pushed out. The moral lesson is that belonging favors the powerful and the silent, not the honest or the harmed. This triad therefore diagnoses whether silence is protecting inclusion or enabling exclusion. Conjunction versus bottlenecking reveals whether moral repair can move freely through a system or where it gets stuck. In the affirmed case, the person speaks, authority listens, and accountability follows. Each of the three components, voice, authority, and repair, activates the others. The person finds courage because the system is responsive. The system responds because someone spoke. The truth travels the circuit and results in action. But in the negated case, the system fails to transmit. The person remains silent or speaks into a void. Leadership refuses to engage, and no repair is initiated. Any one of the three can block the rest. If there is no voice, no authority will act. If authority is unresponsive, speech becomes futile. If no repair is available, no one will speak. What should be a cycle of correction becomes a closed loop of inertia. The entire structure remains intact, but inert. This triad assesses the structural capacity for moral processing. In the affirmed example, an individual speaks up about harm, leadership listens, and action follows. The system works. The individual, the institution, and the truth all converge in a cycle of accountability. Each node supports the others. Truth is voiced, the self is heard, and society acts. The system becomes self-repairing. The lesson learned is that courage paired with responsibility produces change. Institutions can metabolize truth into reform. In the negated example, one or more nodes fail. Leadership ignores or suppresses complaints. Individuals learn that speaking is futile, and wrongdoers are emboldened. Over time, the flow of truth is strangled at multiple points. Victims stop reporting, peers stop acknowledging, leaders stop acting. The institution becomes a closed loop that can no longer receive correction. Silence is now not a gap, but an active mechanism of failure. The agent learns that harm is not a problem to be solved, but a pattern to be absorbed. This triad illustrates whether a moral system is distributed and resilient, or bottlenecked and brittle. Harmony versus dissonance reveals whether moral alignment can be maintained between a person, their honesty, and the community they belong to. In the affirmed case, the individual speaks truthfully, the community responds with clarity or repair, and a shared moral order is reaffirmed. The three components, self, honesty, and group, form a coherent structure that allows each to support the others. The act of disclosure doesn't fracture the whole, it completes it. But in the negated case, the structure falls out of tune. The person is exposed, the group refuses to respond, and the moral signal becomes scrambled. What should have been a reckoning instead produces contradiction. The truth is known but ignored. The group sees but does not act. The self continues but without resolution. Trust erodes, not only in the individual, but in the entire field of relationships. This triad reveals whether the person and their social environment can achieve a moral resonance after the secret is exposed. In the affirmed case, a respected figure within a group, such as a mentor or leader, admits a personal failure and is met with understanding and calls for repair. The act of public honesty resynchronizes the group around a shared standard. Because the failure was acknowledged and addressed, relationships are stabilized, and moral unity is restored. The agent learns that truth strengthens harmony even when it is difficult. In the negated case, the group learns of a leader's wrongdoing, abuse, corruption, betrayal, and yet no action follows. No apology, no correction, no accountability. The silence becomes loud. People begin to interpret not only the leader but the system itself as hollow. Trust, once suspended by shared moral standards, begins to collapse. The agent, whether victim, observer, or perpetrator, senses a deep dissonance between what is known and what is done. The absence of consequence ruptures shared reality. This triad shows that coherence is not just personal. It must be sustained in community, or all members suffer a loss of moral rhythm. Convergence versus divergence tracks whether a person's private understanding, public role, and moral identity stay aligned or split apart. When things go well, the person's values remain intact, their truth is acknowledged, and the surrounding environment, whether professional, cultural, or relational, supports integration. The self, the truth, and the world around them come into alignment. But in the failed version, the outward context remains unchanged, while the truth is suppressed or denied. The person continues to function, but now, with fracture, their public image persists, their private understanding deepens, and their moral identity splits. Over time, this gap widens. The world refuses correction, the truth remains buried, and the self becomes internally incoherent. The eighth triad measures whether the agent's inner life converges with their public identity, or whether silence allows a growing gap between them. In the affirmed case, a professional who once feared damage to their reputation admits a mistake openly and takes steps to correct it. Their private values, humility, integrity, align with their public stance. The exposure of the truth does not fracture their role, it consolidates it. The agent learns that truth leads to convergence. Self and society are not at odds, but can reinforce each other. In the negated case, however, the individual's wrongdoing becomes known, but nothing is done. No censure, no response. The external role remains untouched, but the private self knows the truth. This produces a deepening split. The public identity floats above reproach, while the private conscience, if it still exists, sinks under the weight of dissonance. Over time, the person may compartmentalize so completely that inner and outer selves no longer communicate. The lesson becomes, you can live a divided life and still succeed. But this success is built on fracture. This triad exposes how silence creates duplicity. Even if unspoken, the misalignment erodes identity. Combination versus division addresses whether the person can remain whole after a feared or harmful truth is brought to light. In the affirmed case, the person discloses something once hidden and is met with understanding or grace. They are able to incorporate the truth into their story without fragmentation. The self, the reaction of others, and the nature of the truth are held together without contradiction. But when the dynamic breaks, the opposite occurs. The person commits harm, receives no consequence, and begins to live in a split state, publicly innocent, privately unaccountable. The truth is not denied, but it cannot be admitted either. It floats unclaimed, severing the connection between what the person has done and who they are allowed to be. The internal world is now divided, not by guilt, but by unreconciled reality. This triad reaches the core of identity. Can the agent maintain a unified self after learning their secret produced no backlash? In the affirmed case, a public figure discloses a past truth, perhaps a stigmatized identity, a youthful failure, or an embarrassing history. Because no one punishes them, and many respond with grace, the person is able to integrate their past into their current narrative. They don't have to divide the self into then and now or public and private. The result is peace through wholeness. The lesson is, truth, when paired with grace, allows honest selfhood. In the negated case, the lesson learned is the opposite. A person commits harm, real harm, and escapes accountability. Publicly, they carry on, but internally, they know what they did. In some cases, they rationalize it. In others, they dissociate from it. Either way, the self splits. One part performs normalcy, while the other part is buried, denied, or twisted into justification. The person learns that without justice, integration is impossible. You can avoid consequence, but the price is internal division. This triad makes clear that grace without truth produces lies, and truth without consequence cannot unify a guilty self. Association versus disassociation reveals whether a person remains morally connected to what they've done or detaches from it entirely. In the affirmed case, the individual faces what they've revealed, others respond meaningfully, and the consequences, however difficult, become part of an integrated moral reality. Their self-understanding, the truth of what occurred, and the social response remain linked. Even failure doesn't sever these bonds, it clarifies them. But in the failed version, the person avoids accountability, others ignore or excuse the event, and the act remains undealt with. Over time, the connection between action and identity dissolves. The individual becomes unbound from their past, from their victims, and from any shared standard. The result isn't denial, it's drift. They remain in power, in motion, in view, but no longer in contact with consequence. This triad concerns the moral wiring between an agent and the outcomes of their behavior. In the affirmed case, a public figure, such as a national leader, admits a failure, endures criticism, and stays engaged in shared norms. Their confession does not sever them from the community, but renews their accountability to it. Crucially, they remain associated with the consequences of their actions. Ownership is intact. The agent learns that being known, even in failure, does not require exile. They are still part of the moral order. In the negated case, a leader avoids all consequence for serious wrongdoing. Over time, this does not merely protect them from punishment, it disconnects them from reality. Truth, victims, and consequence all fall away as reference points. The leader learns that detachment works. Power without accountability becomes its own world, in which the self no longer needs to align with what it has done. This is not simply denial, it is structural disassociation, reinforced by silence and status. The person becomes unreachable by moral appeal. This triad reveals the final stage of individual moral breakdown. When consequence disappears, conscience detaches. Integration versus disintegration determines whether a moral system can absorb truth and remain intact, or whether it shatters under the weight of its refusal. In the affirmed case, a wrongdoing is confronted honestly, institutional structures respond, and collective identity is rebuilt around that process. The link between truth, accountability, and coherence is preserved. A stable self, a responsive system, and a credible moral order emerge together. But when the system fails, these links collapse. The truth is known but ignored, power is insulated from judgment, and social trust corrodes. The result is not simply failure, but fragmentation. Norms lose meaning, roles lose legitimacy, and individuals within the system become disoriented. Without enforcement, there is no moral structure, only its hollow performance. What disintegrates isn't just trust, it's reality itself. This closing triad scales the previous insights from the individual to the collective. It asks not just who the person has become, but what kind of system produced and sustained them. In the affirmed case, a nation or institution, confronts its wrongdoing, perhaps historical injustices, systemic abuses, or leadership failures, and actively responds. Through processes of truth-telling, accountability, and reform, the society reintegrates its fractured parts. Justice is not just punitive, it is restorative. The moral order stabilizes. The collective learns that integrity is possible, not because wrong never occurred, but because wrong was faced. In the negated case, the opposite unfolds. Wrongdoing by the powerful is ignored, normalized, or denied. Institutions become performative. Public trust erodes. Victims are marginalized. There may still be rituals of order, elections, trials, rules, but their substance is hollow. The lesson learned is devastating. Truth does not matter, power is unaccountable, and the moral center has disintegrated. This is not individual corruption, but civilizational fracture. Without enforcement, without memory, without integration, the shared world becomes ungovernable by ethics. It is not that society lacks a moral system, it has inverted it. When a feared truth emerges and no consequences follow, it is never just silence that ensues. It is instruction. Every system, personal, relational, institutional, receives that silence as data and adapts. What matters is the moral logic behind the fear itself. If the fear was rooted in shame, the absence of judgment restores coherence. But if the fear was grounded in actual harm, then silence becomes complicity, and the absence of judgment reshapes the very meaning of right and wrong. Across these 11 structures, we see that moral learning is not optional. It is constant. People and systems always learn something from inaction. They either learn that truth is survivable or that harm is. They either become more capable of repair or more practiced at forgetting. And that distinction, often invisible in the moment, compounds over time, until it defines not just individual character, but collective reality. Nothing happening is never neutral. It is either healing or hollowing. The difference is not in the silence itself, but in what preceded it, and in what it silently endorses.